Work is changing. The question is, are you? Welcome to 99 Problems But Work Ain't One, the new podcast series from How Now that will help you prepare for the fast-changing world of work. I'm your host, Nelson Sivalingam, and I'll be talking to disruptive startups, contrarian thinkers, global leaders, and real game changers, and asking them the burning questions about the challenges we face at work. From scaling cultures and adopting technology to improving well-being and building fast-learning organizations that are prepared for the future of work, we get the insights, tactics, and actionable nuggets of knowledge to put to work. What's the impact of our learning and development efforts? Has training fulfilled its purpose? And why are the answers so often a mystery? The L&D Detective is here to help. Kevin Yates joined us in this episode to offer a three-part framework for measuring impact, to explain why measurement is a skill in itself, and to discuss why failing to define impact means more difficulty in measuring it. Kevin also told us the backstory behind his great L&D Detective brand, which skills a professional needs, whether management is asking to see measurement metrics, how he almost left the industry, and a lot more. So here's my mystery-solving conversation with the one and only L&D Detective. Kevin, welcome to the show.
Hello, Nelson. Good to be here. Thank you.
I've always wanted to have a detective on my show, Kevin. You finally made that dream come true. So let's start with that. The L&D Detective. What mysteries are you investigating, and why the L&D Detective?
Well, I'll start with the last question first. Why the L&D Detective? And Nelson, it's actually not a name that I gave myself. I think that it was, or rather, it is a name that has really been given to me by the industry, by our profession. Over the years, I've just I guess gained this reputation of just kind of investigating facts. Kind of like Sherlock Holmes, right? Because he's solving mysteries. I'm solving mysteries as well. The only difference is that, Sherlock Holmes is solving murder mysteries. I'm solving measurement mysteries. So I guess that's, how I got the reputation in the industry as the L&D Detective. And then, Nelson, to your first question, what kinds of mysteries am I solving? It really is measurement mysteries, right? So it's looking for ways in which we can answer the question, what are the results for training and learning? And by results, I mean, what are the measurable results? What is the impact? Or as I like to call it, how do we measure fulfillment of purpose for our training and our learning and our talent development solutions? And so that's the work that I've been focused on, man, for the past 7 or 8 years or so.
Right.
And that's how that's where I've been focused, right?
Yeah.
And that's how I got this name and this reputation of being the L&D Detective.
So before we go into a few of the mysteries that you've solved and you've helped others solve, I just want to backtrack to ask you, why do you think we don't have more L&D detectives, right? Well, why is it that, this kind of narrative around measurable improvement when it comes to L&D, there's so much, what do you measure? Can you really demonstrate ROI? Why do you think we don't have more L&D detectives?
Well, simply put, Nelson, I think that we don't have a lot of L&D detectives because it's difficult work, right? So that's just being honest, and to borrow modern day vernacular, that's just keeping it real. So the reality is that measuring results for training and learning and talent development is very difficult. It can feel very uncertain, very ambiguous, unclear. So there's this space of ambiguity and uncertainty that you have to work in with investigating, results for training and learning, and looking for facts and clues and evidence that shows the extent to which learning has fulfilled its purpose. And so working in that realm of ambiguity can be very uncomfortable. And I suspect that that's why maybe there aren't more what we'll call L&D detectives out there. And just to be transparent, all those things that I said about it feeling ambiguous and uncertain and unsure, I experienced that, right? Even as the quote unquote L&D detective, I experienced those moments of uncertainty and not being sure and ambiguity about what you're really measuring or what you're really looking for. I just kind of continue to dig my heels in and really look for the answers, because I believe the answers are there. They're just not always easy to find. And so I think because it is not easy work, I think that might scare people away.
Yeah, and what's fascinating about this, Kevin, is the idea that although largely, there's data to support, most companies aren't effectively measuring what they're doing in L&D, yet year on year, companies continue to plow in money into training. It's not a budget issue, right? So largely
Right.
speaking, where
Right.
companies are spending over 350 billion a year into training. So how is L&D able to still demand a growing budget globally whilst we're still not addressing this measurement? And do you think somewhat that's the reason why it's not getting addressed, because they know you're going to get the budget anyway?
That's an interesting. I've never heard it put quite that way, Nelson. Because it's like what you're saying is there may be some learning and development organizations who really aren't investing, or rather who aren't investing in the measurement effort because they know they're going to get the funding to support their efforts anyway. I don't know that that's the case, right? Um, I think that what we're really challenged with is finding the skill, the capability, and the focus, right? Because investigating results for training and learning is an art, a science, and a skill. And those are capabilities that are pretty unique and pretty specific to the kind of work that I do. And I'm often referred to as a unicorn because there aren't a lot of us out here who are doing this kind of work. Now, there are some of us globally. I have a lot of colleagues and peers in my professional network around the world who are doing the exact kind of work that I'm doing. They are L&D detectives as well, and they are investigating results and looking for answers. But when it comes to some of the ways in which training and learning organizations are not measuring results, I don't believe it's because they take for granted that they're going to get the budget to do what they do anyway. I think that, again, there's maybe a lack of that skill set on teams, but I also think that it depends upon the extent to which the training and learning organization is asked to produce the kinds of results that I investigate, right? Because more often than not, the traditional evidence for air quote impact is how many people did we train, how many classes did we offer, how many hours of learning did we offer, what are the different modalities. And so that is what a lot of senior leaders are used to getting. And a lot of senior leaders don't know that you can really take that measurement to another level by making connections between what people learned and how they perform. So I think that those are just some of the reasons why there's slow adoption to measurement maturity. But to be certain and to be clear, there are organizations that are doing some amazing work when it comes to measurement. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, for sure. And I'd definitely love to hear about some of those organizations. And, I hear your point around the leadership, right? So, what can you expect if leaders aren't clearly defining the role and priority of learning within the organization, then you're just going to get the activity metrics that you mentioned there in terms of, how many bums on the seat did we put and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of level of impact you're going to get. And do you think that in your experience, you tend to see that happen more in organizations where L&D tends to report into HR or the people function, rather than in organizations where you've got a CLO who's reporting directly into the C-suite, right? They're like into the CEOs and collaborating with the CEOs and therefore have a seat at the table. Do you see a difference in how they go about measuring these things?
I see where there are senior leaders, let's just say the CEO, who is really holding their chief learning officers accountable for supporting business goals, supporting execution of business strategy. And in that accountability piece is the expectation that there will be some evidence that shows the extent to which training and learning as a support mechanism is actually helping to move the needle on whatever that business goal is. So I don't know that there is any unique type of organization or any unique type of discipline relative to it being HR or non-HR or specifically L&D or specifically reporting into training. I just think there's a lot of variance in this space, and I think that that's the other thing that makes it challenging. Is that you have some organizations who are continuing on the traditional path of impact being defined as operational metrics, which is the metrics that I just described earlier. And then you have some organizations who are further along in the maturity curve who are really looking at ways to connect the dots between training, learning, and people performance. So, different senior learning development leaders are being held accountable in different kinds of ways. I think it just depends on where the organization is, again, in that maturity curve, and what the organization is actually able to do based on the talent that they have on their training or their L&D teams. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, Kevin, what should L&D be measuring?
Wow, Nelson. So I would, so here's how I think about measurement, right? Because I'm always thinking about impact. And my belief is that impact is what you define it as, right? So I just want to let that marinate in a little bit, right? So again, impact is what you define it as. If you don't define it, it's going to be very difficult to measure. So what that means for me is first you have to explicitly describe what you're trying to measure. And I believe that impact measurement falls into three categories. I believe that there is operational efficiency, there is learning effectiveness, and then there's business and performance outcomes, right? So that's how I define impact in those three ways. So with operational efficiency, I'm going to measure the extent to which the way that training and learning is operating as a function is successful in what it's doing.
Right.
So when we talk about operational efficiency, it's some of those metrics, again, that I talked about earlier. How many people did we train? How many hours of training do we offer? What is the consumption and utilization of our training and learning resources? So that data is okay. There's nothing wrong with gathering and collecting that kind of data and doing that kind of measurement. But let's keep it in context because it is measuring operational efficiency. Where organizations struggle, continue to be challenged, is not going any further than that, right? Some organizations just sit right there in the operational efficiency. And again, there's nothing wrong with measuring operational efficiency. I think it's one link in the chain of evidence that leads to impact, but we got to go further, right? So let's measure operational efficiency. And then the second one, let's measure learning effectiveness. And I describe learning effectiveness as measuring the extent to which training and learning results in incremental knowledge, right? Results in the way in which people are using what they learn to do something different, or maybe even to think differently. So let's measure learning effectiveness as well. And then what I like to call the third link in the chain of evidence for measuring impact and results is business outcomes and performance outcomes. So that's where we continue to connect those dots to say, as a result of what people learned and as a result of what people consumed and utilized, i.e., the operational metrics, and that's why they're important, are people performing, right, differently? Is what they learned showing up day to day on the job? Is it manifesting itself in the way in which they're executing in their job and in their role? And is that manifestation of how they are performing showing up with how they're able to impact business goals, right? So those are the things that I believe we should be measuring. Those three things. We should be measuring operational efficiency, learning effectiveness, and outcomes for business goals and people performance. So that's how I connect the dots, and those are the things that I think we really got to be measuring.
I really like that framework, Kevin. And just to take those last two and starting with learning effectiveness, could you give me examples of how do I go about measuring that? What's the actual mechanisms I put in place to be able to measure learning effectiveness?
I'll share with you my most favorite methodology for measuring learning effectiveness, and it is through business simulation, right? Or through environmental simulation. The essence of what I'm describing, Nelson, is a way in which you can create a simulation
Yeah.
that captures the real world environment in which an employee is expected to, work, operate, execute. And in that environment, they're able to make decisions, they're able to make choices. But what it really does is show the extent to which they're able to apply what they've learned.
Right.
Now, if you don't have the budget for a simulation, because I'll keep it real, simulations are not cheap. If you want to measure learning effectiveness, it may be something as simple as your traditional pen and paper test, right? True, false, multiple choice, fill in the blank, matching, right? But I think that the more advanced way and the more credible way is to immerse an employee into a simulated environment, again, where they have to make choices and make decisions that ultimately show the extent to which they are able to apply what they've learned. So that's my favorite way to measure learning effectiveness.
And then in terms of examples of measuring whether it's delivered on business goals and performance, that the last one that you mentioned, what are some of the examples of how that's been done?
So what you have to be very clear about up front, Nelson, and I need to take a step back because I want to make sure that I share this because it's important. Before you even start to think about everything that we've talked about, we got to have clarity around purpose, right? So if a training and learning solution is designed to, let's say, support managers in having better conversations with employees to improve engagement in the areas of employee retention, then that is what the learning or training solution has to be designed to do exactly and specifically. So now I want to try to connect that dot back to your question, because your question was, how do you measure the performance change and the business impact, right? So with the scenario that I just described, the performance change is that managers are better able to engage with employees, right? And the business outcome is that we increase retention. So retention is a business metric that we have that we can measure. Now, what I want to add to that, though, Nelson, is that training and learning has never, ever in my 25 years, I just gave my age away, in my 25 years of being in training, learning, and talent development, I have never, ever seen training and learning support a business goal by itself. Okay. So with this example of improving employee retention, training and learning is going to be one of the levers that do that, but it's not going to do it by itself. I think it was important for me to add that caveat. So again, bringing it back to your question, the essence of what we're able to do, if we kind of pull it all together, right? Let's take a look at measuring impact as defined as operational efficiency. So the first thing we got to measure is the extent to which there's consumption and utilization of the learning resources and training solutions that are going to help managers better engage. That's where we're going to measure operational efficiency. Then we're going to measure learning effectiveness. And that is where we're going to place managers in a simulated environment that allows them to practice and rehearse having conversations about engagement with their employees, so we can measure the results of that simulation. And then we go to the real world and we take a look at how managers are performing based on their engagement with employees. And we might take a look at specific employee engagement scores that relate back to manager conversations, or we might use 360 results to measure that. And then the business outcome metric would then be the employee retention metric. So again, we're going to look at that metric. We're going to realize that this training solution for manager employee engagement will support the metric, but we're also going to know that there are other things that are going to move that needle as well. So I just tried to create that end-to-end picture for you, and I hope that helps.
Yeah, that definitely helps. And in terms of when is the right time to think about this, and I'm glad you put in that caveat, because in essence, if you're measuring the business goal or performance, that measurement is happening way before you've even decided you started to design your learning experience and go down that kind of thinking. It's coming at the beginning, right? Am I right? Is that the point at which L&D team should be thinking about the measurement framework?
The point at which you think about measurement follows the point at which you recognize there is a business problem to solve or a business opportunity to address, right? So measurement needs to be top of mind. But it also needs to be a part of a discussion that has nothing to do with training, because what we really want to be able to do when the business problem is brought to us, or the business opportunity is brought to us, is have a very specific and unique kind of conversation that allows us to explore whether or not training and learning is the solution, because it may not be, or it may be. Now, here's a shameless plug, Nelson. on my website at kevinmyates.com, I have the L&D Detective Kit, right? And it's free. It's totally free. So if our audience wants to go out and grab a copy, it's totally free. But in the L&D Detective Kit, what you're going to find are some questions that I have developed that helps you get to measurement. And the questions about getting to measurement are the conversations that you're going to have up front far before you start talking about a specific training or a specific learning solution. So to kind of take it back to your question, we got to be thinking about measurement at the front end, so that before anything is consumed or utilized or launched, we've already decided what we're going to measure and when we're going to measure it. And the L&D Detective kit helps you do that.
Yeah, and definitely, and we'll be adding the L&D Detective kit in the show notes for anyone who's interested. They can definitely check that out. And in terms of enabling that measurement process, Kevin, how far is it getting the right tech in place that enables you to measure these metrics? And also, I guess tying it to that is, you mentioned you've seen some companies do incredible things around measuring L&D effectiveness and whether they're delivering on performance, etc. It would be great to hear some of those examples. You don't have to name any companies, but just things that you've seen that we could learn from.
Yes, so tech is an unavoidable aspect of measuring, right? Because through technology, you're able to acquire data, you're able to access data, you're able to analyze data, you're able to visualize data. So different organizations are using different tech solutions. And I don't have a preference for any particular one. I do believe that there are great opportunities for organizations where they have a data warehouse that pulls into that data warehouse different data sources that allow you to connect the dots. So here's what I mean by that. If you can, in a data warehouse, have information about employee performance, about learning resource consumption and utilization, business metrics, then through collection, aggregation, and extraction of that data from a data warehouse, you're able to, again, tell that full end-to-end story. And then going back to your question about tech, the way in which you visualize that data, I mean, there are a lot of options out there. You got Tableau, you got Power BI, Google has a data visualization solution. So, again, to answer your question, tech is an unavoidable aspect of being able to do the analysis and the work to investigate the impact story. So you absolutely have to find that, or use that rather. And then your question was around where I've seen companies do a really great job at that. I've seen an organization where I once worked do some really good work that I was a part of, that I led, where we wanted to connect the dots between training and learning and leader performance, kind of going back to that leadership example, which is why I rely on it a lot. And because leadership development is actually one of the most difficult things to measure. But in this particular organization, through being proactive up front about what the expectations were for where we would see a change in leader performance based on the leadership training, we proactively decided what our measurement plan was going to be, who our data partners were, what we were trying to answer, right? Because the best types of data will do one of three things, or maybe all. It'll answer questions, inform decisions, and predict outcomes. And again, it may do one or all three of those. But where I saw this particular organization do a great job with my leadership is just being clear up front about the story we wanted to tell, the way in which we wanted to use data to inform decisions, and the way in which we wanted to use data to predict outcomes. So we wanted to see the extent to which this training and learning solution for leaders could be made scalable for the globe based on what it said about particular regions. Because where we saw people performing differently, as a result of the training and learning solution, we were able to draw some conclusions and make some correlations about the extent to which the training and the leadership development program actually activated that performance that we were looking for.
And I love what you said, Kevin, about tech, because we often say now is the best time to buy tech, right? Because there are, every platform can talk to each other through APIs. And like you said, if you've got a great data warehouse set up for it, you can really leverage talent and company data in a way where you're almost individualizing it for every moment of need someone has within the organization. And it can be really powerful just to set up that tech stack right in the first place. And I'm glad you mentioned that. Now, before we go on to the quickfire round, Kevin, we spoke about the tech, but what about the skills, right? When just hearing you talk, it reminds me a lot of I started my career in marketing, and like, more than a decade after leaving that behind, the function had changed completely, right? It became a lot more. It moved away from the early days of kind of four Ps, and now it was a lot more data and
I
analytics.
remember the four Ps.
And there are, I think there are seven now, but yeah, there were data scientists who are coming in. The kind of function changed, growth hacking, all of these elements came into the function, and you know data and being data literate became a norm for any marketer who was operating in the space. And hearing you speak, that's exactly what's happening with the L&D function now. So to an L&D person listening to this thinking, where do I even start? What are the skills as an L&D professional should I be working on and developing?
So I think it depends upon where you are on the L&D discipline spectrum, right? And here's what I mean by that, Nelson. One of the great things that I believe there is about our profession is the variety in roles and the variety in the discipline. So, you have instructors, facilitators, you have learning technologists, you have people who are focused on learning administration, learning operations. You have people who are focused on leadership development, specific areas of development. You have learning coordinators, you have learning strategists. So there are so many disciplines that span across, or rather roles that span across our discipline, right? And then you have learning measurement and learning measurement sciences. So that is a unique and specific discipline.
Right.
It kind of crosses over, but kind of not. So your question is, where should an L&D professional focus? And I'm guessing you mean specifically as it relates to measurement. And I believe that at the common core, that all learning and development professionals should be data literate or have a little bit of analytic acumen, right? Now, the extent to which you dive deep into the measurement aspect is really, I believe, going to depend upon your role, because it's not work that everyone is interested in. And as I said earlier, there are some pretty unique skill sets that are required for deep measurement expertise.
Right.
So I think what I'm saying, Nelson, is that individual L&D professionals, I believe, have the opportunity to decide how far and how deep they want to go with measurement, right? But at the foundation level, I just believe that everyone entering into L&D, everyone who's already in L&D, just needs to have a little bit of knowledge, experience with measurement at the most foundational level, and again, at least be data savvy and have some data acumen. Now, how far you go with that, I think, is up to the individual, outside of those individuals who are specifically focused on it, like me.
Kevin, that made me want to ask, what triggered you to when, at what point did you have this kind of realization of measurement and really building your kind of skill set and focus around this area?
Man, how much time do you have? I'm going to try to tell this story as quickly as I can. I'm going to try to do it in about a minute. So I think it was around about 2000. Oh, I don't know, man, maybe 12 or so. No, maybe it was a little later than that. But anyway, long story short, a few years ago, I was actually thinking about leaving the profession, because at that point, I had done a lot of work in training, learning, and talent development, and I was just a little bored. I kind of felt as though I hit a glass ceiling. And then around about that same time, I attended a workshop that was led by Dr. Patty Phillips with the ROI Institute. Her and her husband, Jack Phillips, head up the ROI Institute. They're a global phenomenon. They both are. They're amazing. And prior to that, I didn't know anything about measuring the impact of learning. My path was very traditional. So through the ROI Institute and through Jack and Patty Phillips, I discovered that you can actually measure the impact of training and learning. So I'm like, wow, this is amazing.
Right.
And shortly after that, I attended an International Society for Performance Improvement conference. It was in Indianapolis. I never will forget that. And I met a gentleman whose name is Dick Hanshaw. And he was talking about how learning and development should really drive performance and how you can measure the extent to which what people learn about performance actually activates their performance behavior, right? So Dick Hanshaw is talking about measuring performance outcomes. Jack and Patty Phillips are talking about measuring results for training and learning. And I'm like, wow, this is what I want to do for the rest of my career. And so the rest, as they say, is history. So ever since having met Jack Phillips, Patty Phillips, and Dick Hanshaw, I have been narrowly and totally focused on measuring impact. And that's how I landed into this space. So to bring it back to your question, how did I end up in this space? I ended up in this space as a result of almost leaving the profession because I was just beginning to be a little bit bored with everything else I had already done.
Wow, I'm glad I asked that story.
Did I do it in a minute? I don't know.
Yes.
I
So
tried.
Kevin, we're now over to the quick fire round. I want to throw some questions at you, and
All right.
give me
All right. I'm ready. Bring them on, man. I'm
answer.
ready. Let's go.
So let's start with, you mentioned the kind of L&D Detective kit. It's got 10 questions, and it's going to be in our show notes. But I want you to pick one question you should start with out of those 10 questions, right? What's that one question you'd want to flag as, vital, you shouldn't overlook? What's that question?
Okay. If you put it like that, I can answer that question. So there's one, they're all critical because in order to get the answers that you need to create a training and learning solution that will measurably impact business outcomes and performance, you need to ask all those questions. But the one that I believe is really critical is asking, where is performance today versus where it needs to be in order to achieve the business goal and the performance outcomes required to achieve that business goal. I think that that's a question we don't always ask. So it's really just basically saying, where are we today and where do we need to be from a performance perspective to achieve the goal? That's critical. And I don't hear that question being asked enough.
All right. If you had to recommend a book to any budding L&D detective, what would it be?
Let's see. Measurement Demystified by David Vance and Peggy Parsky, both of which are very good friends of mine, both of which who have been mentors to me. But that book is a must-have. If you're looking to measure results for training and learning, you have to get Measurement Demystified.
All right. Do you think there's any particular L&D trend we should keep our eye out on for the near future?
I do. And it goes back to your technology question, actually. So what I think we really need to keep an eye on that I believe is gaining a little bit more traction is XAPI. And I think you've heard of it because you mentioned it, referenced it, right? So I think that XAPI is going to eventually take over SCORM. And for those who don't know what I'm talking about, I talk about SCORM and XAPI. It's basically what you use as a language to write e-learning courses. So I believe that XAPI is really going to take off sooner rather than later.
And obviously, you have an incredible personal brand. Are there any tips you can give someone who's looking to develop their own brand?
My tip is pretty simple, Nelson. I think that one of the reasons that I have been successful with my brand is that I am authentically living in my brand. So in other words, I didn't create a brand to which I aspired to be. My brand is just who I am. And that just makes it a lot easier for me because, I believe that living in authenticity is a lot easier than living in duality, because living in duality is just way too much work. Yes. So my recommendation for those who are looking to build a brand or who are already in the process of brand building is to revolve your brand around who you are. And don't try to create a persona that you're not comfortable being or living in. Just be who you are and let that drive what your brand is.
Yeah, I love that, Kevin. It's hard enough being yourself, let alone trying to be.
It is, man.
What's the one thing, I'm an L&D professional, I'm listening to the show. Yeah. What's the one thing I should go and do at my company today to kind of take that step in the right direction? What's that thing I should do?
I would say do something that I'm doing a lot more of, and that's tell the truth. So here's what I mean by that. Relative to measurement, right? That's the context within which I'm sharing this with you. There are some things that we can measure, and then there are some things that we can't. And it took me a while to be okay with saying that out loud. But for me, it's all about telling the truth, and it's being transparent about what we can and we can't do. So, um, your question was, what can someone in L&D start doing today? And I would say, just whatever the truth is, just start telling it, and don't be afraid to tell it. In those instances where you have to tell the truth about something that you can't do, I learned from a manager once. His name is Bill. No, I'm not even going to try to remember, but anyway, um, what he said to me is, Kevin, whenever there's something that you can't do, you need to be prepared to tell us what you can do. So, again, my recommendation for what you can do starting today is to tell the truth. And whenever you have to tell the truth about something that you can't do, follow that up with what you can do.
Just a quick note on that one, Ken. What's a example of something you can't measure, right? Like where you might need to, but you need to just put your hands up and say, can't measure this.
So I think that this is generally true for anything that we measure as it relates to training, learning, and talent development. And I don't believe that you can ever say that something happened or changed
Right.
only because
Right.
of training and learning.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of thing that you can't measure. I do believe that you can measure what would not happen in the absence of training and learning, right?
Right.
But to say that something happened only because of it, I don't believe you can measure that. I
Yeah.
believe that you can create stories that show the influence of training and learning, and
Yeah.
how, in partnership with other variables or other triggers, how training and learning help to activate behavior, actions, performance, and business goals. But I don't believe that you can measure something and say that this happened only because of training and learning.
And we're completely getting off on a tangent, eh, Kevin, but you've started me off
Go
here.
ahead.
But in terms of, I know in product development and when we're doing marketing, we talk a lot about A/B testing, right? Do you
Yeah.
see a lot of that in L&D? Because it might be a great way to kind of be able to kind of silo out the influence of L&D to see
Yes.
actually with L&D. Yeah, do you see that happening much?
Absolutely, Nelson. And I believe that A/B testing, and for our audience that don't know what we're talking about, we talk about A/B testing, we talk about control groups and test groups, or most commonly known as a pilot group.
Yeah.
I believe that pilot testing is the most credible way to show the extent to which training and learning, in partnership with other levers and activators, is moving the needle on people performance and business outcomes. So if you want to measure most credibly and reliably, pilot testing, A/B testing, control group, test group, that is going to be the best way to do that for me, hands down, undeniably.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what do you know now that you wish you knew at the start of your career, other than the realization around measurements and measuring performance, etc.?
Nelson, that's an interesting question, man. So you're saying, what do I wish I knew so many years ago? And I'm not going to tell you how many. You're asking how many, what would I change? And man, to be perfectly honest with you, um, I don't think that I'd want to know anything then that I know now, because my journey to where I am today has been pretty surprising, pretty amazing, very unexpected. Because for where I am today, there was not a lot of strategic planning or decision about it. I didn't map out my career. I'll be just transparent about that. I'm not one of those people who sat down and said, this is who I want to be when I grow up. For me, my journey has just been one of constant surprise, with a lot of peaks and valleys along the way. And I've enjoyed the journey, and everything that I've experienced from from the point of back then to today has helped me be who I am. So I don't know that I want to take away from that experience by knowing something 20 or 25 years ago, um, that I wish I knew today, because I think that would take away some of the joy,
Yeah.
and the excitement and the surprise of my experience. Yeah.
I mean, apart from being a detective, Kevin, you've also recently launched a non-profit that provides
Yeah.
food support assistance. Can you tell us a bit more around Meals in the Meantime? Is that right?
Yeah, and thank you for asking about that, Nelson, because I'm very excited about that. And that goes back to what I was saying about surprise along the way in terms of my journey. I know nothing about nonprofits, man. But I and I've entered into this space that is very surprising and very exciting for me. So I started a nonprofit a couple of months ago, and it is called Meals in the Meantime. If our listeners and watchers want to go out and learn more about it, you can go to mealsinthemeantime.org. And it is a nonprofit that is serving underserved communities who are in need of food. Um, Hunger is a real thing, Nelson. There are people who do not have access to food, who are hungry, who are experiencing food deficits. And my nonprofit, Meals in the Meantime, is focused on filling the food gap with nourishment and dignity. So we honor the humanity of who we serve through pop-up food pantries. So we go directly into the communities that are underserved, and we provide boxes of food so that they can feed themselves and feed their families. And so I'm really excited about that
Yeah.
because I think I've done a good job at serving the global L&D community, and now I just want to take that service mindset to a different level by really impacting communities where people are just really struggling and who need help with access to food. So I'm doing that with Meals in the Meantime, and I'm really excited about it.
I think it's an absolutely incredible initiative, Kevin, and good luck with it. And
Thank you.
Great to speak to you. Thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Nelson. Good talking to you.
And that's the end of this week's episode. Hopefully, measurement isn't as much of a mystery and you're ready to become an L&D detective in your own right. If not, you'll find Kevin's detective kit linked in the show notes, where you'll also find the links you need to connect with Kevin or myself. If you enjoyed this episode, please do think about subscribing, sharing, leaving us a review, or telling a friend. It goes a long way in helping the show grow. Thanks, and see you next time.